at cross-border talks, we continue following the developments from Brazil. We had already published our interview with Sergio Mișcoi, a Romanian political scientist, and now we are going to make a recapitulation of what happened in the last 24 hours with Ms. Małgorzata Kulbaczewska. Małgorzata, can we start with what happened in the last 24 hours? What is the situation now in Brazil?
Okay, so this uprising of the Bolsonaristas is over, if we can even call it uprising, because the people who stormed the government buildings in Brazil's capital had apparently no plan what to do next, apart from shooting selfies and videos of themselves in the corridors. But in any case, the calm is now in the capital of Brazil is now calm. Those who were inside the government buildings are no longer there. Some of them were arrested, some of them dispersed around the city, and the big protest camp of the Bolsonaro supporters was also surrounded by the police. As of now, and it is almost 5 o'clock according to Central Eastern European time, more than 300 people have been arrested, and Lula is announcing that they will be punished with the biggest severity, because, as he put it in his yesterday's speech, there was nothing like this in the history of Brazilian democracy. No incident like this has happened, and people who were involved were fascists, fanatics, and they deserve punishment for what they have done. Indeed, there are more questions now also in the Brazilian political life. The essential question is why the police in Brasilia was very tolerant towards the protesters, why the security measures introduced around the inauguration of Lula were limited by putting these barricades around the parliament building, which were very easily removed by the protesters, why nobody bothered to do something about the big Bolsonarista camp in Brasilia that was still there on the day of inauguration and later, even though the extreme right supporters were violent, have been violent since the first day when they heard that their favorite politicians lost the election. As I wrote on Cross Border Talks in December, there was an incident in Brazil when an extreme right supporters was arrested for planning a bomb attack in the airport of Brasilia, hoping that this act will actually allow the military to step up and take power in the ensuing chaos. There was another incident of that kind in December as well, with the Bolsonaristas trying to storm the headquarters of Brazilian police, and individual acts of terror, individual acts of violence were also numerous over the last weeks. So the question arises why, despite everybody knowing this in Brazil, the police was so calm on the day of the protest on the 8th of January, why it was so easy for the Bolsonaristas to cross the pickets, to cross these temporary barricades. Well, Lula is promising to investigate on this, and it is in fact a key question of the Brazilians in the security of the internal security of Brazil. To what extent the Bolsonaro supporters are present in the police, in the law enforcement agencies, and would they be able ever to try again staging a coup in a more organized manner? This is a question that everybody in Brazil is now asking, and definitely this is a big job from the point of view of the security to resolve this.
We saw that there were a number of international leaders who expressed their solidarity with the Brazilian democracy and with Lula. Could you also make some kind of a sum up on the reactions which came from the international political leaders?
Indeed, there was a moment of hesitation yesterday when we needed to wait more than 2 hours for a reaction of the United States. And frankly speaking, when I posted in Polish on my Facebook page a short note about the events in Brazil, I was immediately asked by my readers, are the US staging another armed coup in Latin America? In fact, they were not. because we finally had both messages from the Secretary of State and then from Joe Biden, both of them expressing solidarity with Lula and a staunch support for Brazilian democracy. But indeed, there was a moment of hesitation that allowed us to think, and what if the empire, the American empire, is actually waiting for the events to go further and is just now determining their final reaction. In fact, the first heads of state to react on the events were the staunchly leftist or center-left leaders of Latin American countries. If I'm not mistaken, the two who came first with solidarity messages were Gustavo Petro from Colombia and Gabriel Boric of Chile, so two representatives of the new pink wave in Latin America, and they were followed by the representatives of Argentina and Mexico. So we are still around these social democratic rulers of Latin America. As for Europe, their message of solidarity came much later, and the biggest absent scene was the one from Russia, because the Russian foreign ministry published their message of solidarity with Brazilian democracy only today. When the situation was already calm and everybody knew that Lula will stay in the office. And this might be surprising given how visible was the Russian representation on the Lula's inauguration, and how close are the relations between the two states in both terms of trade and of some political cooperation. We must remember that Brazil is a pillar of the BRICS and is one of the strongest economies of the world, who did not take the side of Ukraine in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. In fact, after sanctions were imposed on Russia, the Brazilian trade with Russia actually grew. And for instance, Russia is the top exporter of fertilizers, and almost 1/4 of all fertilizers used in Brazilian agriculture come from Russia. And this, perhaps now it is even a bigger percentage. In any case, it was pretty surprising not to hear any Russian reactions for a while, but it becomes less surprising if we go back to what Russian media said after the elections, when everybody waited to see whether Lula will prevail over Bolsonaro or not. At the moment when the Brazilians were choosing between the extreme right representative and a man who promised a better future to millions of Brazilians, the Russians' position was basically that they were happy with any outcome because they had good relations with both Lula and Bolsonaro, because any of them is going to continue international politics of Brazil as it was in previous 5 years. And none of them was really eager to stand staunchly against Russia in the conflict with Ukraine and the West. So as you can see, the Russians were just waiting. The Russians did not care much, neither about democracy nor about Lula, not really surprising. But for me, this is not basically for me, but for the left-wing sympathizers who still see in Russia some alternative for the United States-led world order. Well, this shows that even in a moment when a progressive leader is endangered by extreme right-wing people, so when we have really a situation which is clear from, I don't know, moral, political, social point of view, whatever, even at this moment, Russians will not stand for the democratic option because they simply don't care.
Our interlocutor Sergio Mishko noted that right now, throughout the world, including in Brazil, there is a division in the right political tendency, and a part of the right, let's call it centrist right or moderate right, is in fact collaborating with the internationalist tendency and with the left wing even, and this is seen now in Brazil. With Lula collaborating with some allies from the Brazilian right. Could you speak more about that?
Lula is determined to see Brazilians people getting better here and now, and he understands that in the situation that he has here and now, he needs some allies on the right. On the other hand, the moderate right wing, as you put it, understands very well that Lula is no revolutionary, that he is not a person who would like to overthrow capitalist system, and they are also perfectly aware of the fact that overthrowing capitalism today is way more difficult than it had ever been. So Lula is no longer their key enemy, and there is a field for cooperation for both sides. There is a field of compromise for both sides. Let us just have a look on the composition of Lula's government, which has 37 ministries and only 10 people being members of the Workers' Party. Everybody else is either a technocrat or a person with a right-leaning political record on moderate right on in the centrist parties. Let us have a look at the person who was Lula's running mate, who is now the vice president of Brazil. It is not a left-wing politician neither. And this strategy of Lula for some has some results, as he managed to get, for example, to get the agreement for the right wing in the Congress to get his famous program of Bolsa Familia back. The program which helped to raise Brazilian families from poverty was stopped by Bolsonaro in 2021, and now with Lula having secured enough votes of the moderate right wingers, it is most likely to come back this year. So, as you can see, Lula is not striving at overthrowing capitalism in Brazil or anywhere else, and the moderate right wingers are seeing that their profits are not really in danger, their domineering position is not really in danger, so they can afford some concessions that assure public stability, social stability. This will not change, and so I think this is the line that Lula will be following in the coming months, in the coming years, as the best strategy to get at least part of his program put into practice, especially in the not very good economic situation that Brazil is. This is, of course, not satisfactory for the extreme right wingers. As for extreme right voters of Bolsonaro, Lula is an incarnation of evil, whatever he does. And for some of those people who voted Bolsonaro, it really doesn't matter whether Lula is on good terms with the moderate right wingers in the Congress. It doesn't matter how cautious he is when doing some tax reforms or implementing some redistribution. He is the evil itself, just because. And this will be a key challenge of the politics in Brazil, and not only in Brazil. What to do with these people who live, well, a part of any parliamentary system, who don't really take part in the debate, but instead who feed themselves with fake news, who feed themselves with some sensational information circulating in social media, and who are apparently no more controllable by anybody. For I don't even think that Bolsonaro himself or anybody in his party would be really planning a coup d'etat with these people who tried to invade the parliament of Brazil yesterday. As everybody could see, nobody had a plan what to do, even in this very moment when the power in Brazil seemed to lie in the streets.